full autonomy, the deployment, safety, customer adoption, when people are going to be comfortable putting their kids in a self-driving car, are a lot of the factors that went into our thinking around what it is that we believe are some of the first really, really valuable use cases of autonomy that are very much outside the passenger space. And the reason that we got into this, and I'll give a little bit more detail about what this is that we were thinking very carefully about what we've seen happen over the last several decades and what we see happening over the coming decades. And I think one of the realizations we had is that in the past 30 years, the digital world has transformed completely. And in fact, 30 years ago, that phrase didn't even mean anything. Today, we have PCs, we have the internet, we have smartphones, we have VR, sort of. And the way that we both communicate and work has completely changed. However, if you look at the physical world, not much has changed at all, right? Like, look at the chairs that you're sitting in. They might be slightly different than they were 30 years ago, although perhaps not so much here. The vehicle that you drove here is a little bit different than the vehicle that you might have had 30 years ago, but not drastically so. And so our relationship in the physical world has really not changed that much. And we think that that's going to significantly change over the coming 1 to 2 decades. Now, when you look at our relationship in terms of commerce, this too hasn't really changed in 50 years. Now, one of our partners at Nuro is Kroger, the world's largest grocer, 2,800 stores. They have some beautiful images of the first grocery store that they ever built in the US, and it looks basically like the same experience that you have at your local Kroger or Whole Foods now. Right? And I think that as exciting as the growth of e-commerce has been, today in the US, e-commerce is only 13% of all commerce. Right? And that means that 87% of all commerce is still performed locally, much the same way that it was 50 years ago. And in the US, that means getting in a car, driving to your local store, your local goods and service provider, buying something, driving home, often in a Ford F-150. And so what this means from a societal perspective is that we're spending an enormous amount of time and effort running around shopping and doing errands. And in fact, also on the panel just before, we talked about how much time is spent running errands and the waste that's involved. In the US, it's the equivalent of 60,000 lifetimes that we spend every year inside vehicles running errands. That's an incredible waste of time and effort. And it's really interesting to us when you break down the personal trips taken in the US. So in the US, we take something like 400 billion personal vehicle trips a year. 43% of them are for shopping and running errands. And so when we talk about mobility overall and the application of self-driving and autonomy and what this could disrupt, we will look at that entire pie and say, look, all of these trips right now have a driver, and clearly we could replace that driver with a self-driving vehicle and give that time back to the driver while they're in the car. But the way that we looked at this, we recognized that 43% of those trips not only don't need a driver, but they don't need a passenger. And so there's an enormous opportunity here to reduce, remove, replace those trips and give both the time back to the people that would otherwise be in those cars and to improve safety, efficiency, and quality of our communities in general. And so we thought hard about what it would take to reduce or remove those trips. And in our mind, if there was a service that existed that could get you something, whatever it was that you wanted to go out and get, the service could bring it to you faster than you going to the store yourself, and for little or no additional cost, then that would really be one of these transformative product opportunities that would drastically change the way that we perform all of these local shopping trips and in general personal car ownership. And what we mean by that, and the vision that we see happening, is really all of those trips, right? So it's your trips to the grocery store, it's general merchandise, it's restaurant foods, it's your prescriptions, your CVS, your dry cleaning, your coffee, and then a whole plethora of new, really exciting stuff that we don't even have yet because these services don't exist. And so we've been thinking hard about what it would take as an industry, also for us specifically, but as an industry, what it would take to deliver on this. And we think that there are really two key pieces or two key ingredients that are required to do this in a timely manner. And it's self-driving in order to hit the unit economics that you need to provide a really, really amazing service at low cost. And it's also goods specific vehicles in self-driving, and I'll dig into both of those briefly. On the self-driving side, right now we basically have a spectrum of delivery services that exist, and on one side are those that are relatively inexpensive, but are also relatively slow. And again, this is very relative because a couple decades ago, 2-day delivery would have been an insanely fast SLA. But these are sort of the UPS, FedEx, Amazon-style delivery where you can batch a whole lot of packages together in a big truck, drive a block between drop-offs, and effectively you're amortizing the cost of that driver over many, many packages to bring the cost down. At the other end, in terms of the SLA and customer experience, you have the on-demand services. So things like Uber Eats, DoorDash, Instacart, where you're able to get things relatively quickly, basically on demand, but it's very, very expensive because you're effectively amortizing a driver over a single delivery. So that's you basically have a personal chauffeur or courier that's bringing you something. Now, what's exciting about self-driving is that it enables us to hit both of these because we can drastically, over time, reduce the cost of this service so that we can provide the on-demand nature that will be the future product experience for customers, but we can also do it in a way that is super, super low cost. And so this is why self-driving is exciting. This is exactly the same plot and economics, basically, for passenger mobility, like when we can nail all of the sensor costs and all the rest. So self-driving is important. I think the thing that we are very excited about and somewhat uniquely excited about, and this also touches upon some of the stuff that was discussed in the panel, is we believe by focusing on goods, you can bring this about much, much faster. And some of the reasons for that were already described earlier, but basically, when you don't have a passenger inside the vehicle, you no longer need to worry about the comfort and safety of your passenger, and you can focus entirely on the safety of what's outside the vehicle. So we like to say at Nuro, we care more about what's outside the vehicle than what's inside, and that's very, very true. And it means that you can make the trade-off of driving more conservatively, perhaps in a way that you would get criticized for driving like your grandparents, but in a way that makes that vehicle inherently way safer for everyone else on the road. You can also do a lot on the hardware side where you can optimize the entire shape of the vehicle and the front end and all of the safety concepts of it to reduce any possible severity of an accident with the most vulnerable road users like pedestrians. So there's a lot, I don't have time to dig into this, but there's actually a lot of advantages of focusing on goods only that can really help nail this problem and constrain it in a way that you can solve it much, much faster than the full passenger problem. So that's what we've been doing at Nuro, right? We sort of recognize this. We've been working on it for about 3 years. This is an animation of the vehicle that we built within the first year of the company. It has 2 compartments. Each one is designed to be general purpose to support a variety of goods, and also has a flexible insert framework where you can basically insert an application-specific compartment, right? So perhaps you want to do lockers, perhaps you want to do an ice cream truck. You can slot that in, and the idea is that each one of these is totally private, and you can further subdivide them to add more privacy. This is an on-road vehicle, so this particular one drives at a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour, but on roads with other traffic. It's not a sidewalk vehicle, and our goal is for this to form the basis of this local logistics platform that could provide a service such as the one that I was talking about. Now, we've been working really hard on this, and in fact, I mentioned we have a partnership with Kroger, the world's largest grocer. In August last year, we started running a self-driving grocery delivery service to the general public. We started with Toyota Prius vehicles that we had all of our sensors on, and they look a lot like the self-driving cars that you see from Waymo and others. But then in December, we rolled out into this service a couple of our custom unmanned vehicles. So the ones shown here as part of that service, and we have a video here showing some of the responses from the very first public customers that use this service. So let's see if this works.
Are you serious?
There it is.
Oh my gosh. You guys, there's nobody driving this car.
There's nobody in that. I'm Nick Campusano.
I'm Kristen Campusano. We have 4 boys. We have our hands full all the time. Grocery shopping is probably my biggest chore of the week.
I'm Rosemary Nava, and I'm 81. I do get busy. I'm still working part-time, and so I could see that ordering something and being delivered here would be wonderful.
I'm Aruna.
And I'm Anita.
I'm an artist musician. I don't like to go to the store.
It's like a cute robot came down the street and delivered our groceries for us. It's an actual car.
It has lights?
Yep.
I have never seen a self-driving car before. This is a first experience for me.
I went and touched the screen. I put my pin in.
And the doors opened. It was so simple. I thought it was exciting. My dog, Jack, thought it was exciting.
You guys were the first ones to get donuts out of a robot.
Convenience is the future, right? We literally ordered food online and it just rolled up, but there's no driver inside. Oh, that's wild.
Wow.
Let's check it out.
Once we were done getting our groceries, the doors closed. It said goodbye and drove off.
It was a friendly car. The price of delivery is so reasonable, something I can well afford.
To be part of the first one.
It's awesome. I love being ahead of technology.
This is exciting. This is the future.
I hope one day this is all over the world. And this is only the beginning.
And this is the future that we envision. Perhaps with more muted colors, but we really do strongly believe that the first applications of mobility involving autonomy are not going to be passenger-based because of many of the challenges that were discussed by the panel previously, and the very, very clear market need and demand for existing goods transportation. And so we're super excited to be a part of this. We're not going to be the only ones, which we're also excited about, because this is just way too big an opportunity and is way too important to get right. So thanks very much for your time.
Hi, Dave. Have you thought of delivering pizza in a cold university campus in the East Coast?
Pizza and cold.
Or any food in a college campus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're looking at a whole range of possible applications and definitely delivering food. Campuses are potentially easier, potentially harder than public roads, depending on the campus and how outrageous the student body is. Yes. But I think that we're very focused on building something that can operate in public roads unconstrained. I mean, it'll still be geo-fenced, but we don't want to limit ourselves to just private areas like college campuses. We want to get this out there and to have as much impact as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that resonated much. There were many nights in CMU Pittsburgh where we wanted something like this to happen many years back. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I want to ask, what's your opinion on the importance of LiDARs, especially after what Tesla said?
Oh, well, Elon has been saying that for a long time. I'm guessing you're referring to his comment that LiDARs are unnecessary. I think we feel that this is a hard enough problem that we should bring to bear all of the possible sensors that we can. And if the argument was LiDAR or camera, I think it's a pretty reasonable argument. We say sort of both, right? So we have LiDAR, camera, radar, ultrasonic, thermal cameras. We will use everything that we can. And I think one of the nice things about having those different sensors is that they have very, very complementary strengths. Right, so for instance, at night, it's very hard to do a good job even as a human driver, and we have unbelievably good cameras as our eyes, right? And so I think that it just makes sense to try to leverage all of the sensors that you can. LiDAR is not that expensive anymore, and at scale, it's already easily affordable in the context of one of these systems. So we think that it shouldn't all be LiDAR, but that there's no reason for that not to be a part of the puzzle if it's useful.
I'm just curious what environment will work easiest for you, like urban or whatever, and then what's going to be the most difficult down the road?
Yeah, so I think that challenging weather remains a pretty open challenge for the industry at large, right? And I think it's not dissimilar from how you would characterize the driving situations that you would want perhaps a new driver to experience, right? I think you wouldn't start in Manhattan or Boston in a snowstorm, I think you would start where you start in the parking lot and take your kid, driving around the parking lot, and then you go to places that are less traffic, lower speeds. We are focused exclusively on slower speeds. So we won't be 25 miles per hour forever, but we won't be driving on highways either. And so we are very focused on local logistics. We think that at first it'll be relatively good weather, so light to medium rain, not thunderstorms, not snow, and it will be areas that are not as crazily populated. It won't be downtown Manhattan. It'll be more like actually this area, South Bay is a pretty good type of environment where we think it'll work pretty well.
So you partly answered my question, but in how many different ways are you constraining the problem to make it easier so that this kind of application takes off before passenger vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that fundamentally that one of the big differences and advantages that you have when you're only doing goods is that self-driving is such a hard problem because you effectively have to be perfect. And so if you consider the job of detecting a brick in the middle of the road, your system has to detect that brick every time. So you can't have any false negatives. It also can't have any false positives, because if you're driving along in a self-driving Uber and it suddenly brakes and there's nothing there, that's probably the last time you're ever going to ride that service. All right, so you have to have a really, really good performance even in regards to things that don't exist. When you're only transporting goods, you can drastically reduce the constraints on those false positives, right? Like it's okay if our groceries slow down a little bit or take 30 seconds or a minute longer to get to the customer, either by taking a different route that it knows is easier or by just driving more conservatively. That's totally fine for us because our customer experience doesn't really change. That's not okay at all for a self-driving passenger vehicle because it drastically changes the customer experience. And right now, if you're a self-driving passenger service, you're competing against actually a very, very good alternative, right? Like Uber and Lyft are incredibly good services to the customer. And so that's a very, very high bar the first day that Waymo or anyone else wants to start offering a service to the general public. So that's one. I think another big one is our vehicle is half the width of a normal car, which means that it can actually easily avoid situations that may be impossible to avoid for a passenger vehicle. So if you imagine driving down like something like this aisle, a narrow road where there are parked cars, even if you're perfectly attentive as a driver, if someone walks out from between those two parked cars within your stopping distance, there's nothing you can do to avoid hitting them. You can hit the brakes, but you'll still hit them. Our vehicle has an extra sort of 3.5 foot of safety buffer that can mean the difference between easily passing them without hitting them and it being impossible to avoid hitting them, which is a pretty major advantage when it gets to these final edge cases, which are the reason that we're limited in deploying self-driving technology in general.
What question? So fascinating technology. Thanks for your presentation.
Thanks.
So this is free delivery for customers. Who actually pays for the service, and how do you guys make your money?
Yeah, great question. Revenue. Why do we care about that? So I think that the vision is long term. We can figure out an economic model where it would be free to customers. In the early days, probably it may still need to cost them a little bit. But if you take groceries, for instance, right? Groceries have typically like a 21 to 24% product margin on the goods. There's actually a fair bit of margin that's available there. And if you look at a standard basket of a shopper these days, the average cost is around $100. Even if you make that much smaller and say it's a $40 basket size, if you have 20 to 24% margin, that's quite a lot. You're working with about $10 there, right? And if you can get the cost of that delivery down to a couple dollars, it's quite possible that could be taken out of the product margin in conjunction with a lot of the improved experience and advertising opportunities and sort of tailored experiences for the customer. If you look at food like Uber Eats, a lot of these services services charge restaurants around 30% margin, in addition to customers having a delivery fee and a tip and a service charge, right? There's quite a lot of buffer in the system today, so that if you can get the actual cost of operating the service down to a couple bucks for that delivery, it's relatively straightforward to pull that out, right? Like imagine you order dinner and it's $30 from a restaurant, like that restaurant chipping in $2 to get free on-demand delivery to the customer is very, very doable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, fascinating presentation. I think it's really excellent technology. My question is regarding the last mile problem, which is in your vehicles, you are delivering goods to some parties, but they need to be sort of waiting for the vehicle to take the goods route, right? But let's say I want groceries delivered to my home. If I don't want to come all the way out to the curbside to pick the groceries, how do I? So are you solving that last mile problem somehow?
Yeah. So we talk about it is we're solving the last mile, but right now not so much the last 10 feet.
Okay,
right? So
last 10 feet. That's
sort of the last 10 feet problem.
Or 100 feet, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that long term there will be some solutions there. I think right now if you consider the alternatives in some of the verticals that we're working on, there are pretty good alternatives. Like if you get your pizza delivered, they come to your door. But for groceries right now, the cost of grocery delivery is so high that it's not really an option for most people. Like grocery is an $850 billion market in the US. 2% of it is online, right? So it's a tiny sliver, and the reason for that is that it's just too expensive. So if you compare the alternative to you driving to the grocery store and coming back, then the effort of meeting a vehicle in your driveway or at the curb is greatly reduced relative to the alternative. But I think it's a very good point, and it's one of the reasons why we are focused primarily towards the on-demand side of the demand of the market, right? So as opposed to FedEx dropping off packages, which they do very efficiently, very low cost, and you don't need to be there for it. You don't really care. The package gets dropped on your doorstep. I mean, you hope it's still there when you get home, but as long as it is, you're sort of okay with it. We're focusing much more on the on-demand side, where you want something immediately, and thereby you tend to be at the location that you're bringing it to, right? And so there is still a sort of last 10-foot challenge.
Sure.
In suburbia, it tends to not be a problem at all. I think in places like New York City, it will definitely be more of a challenge.
Sure, especially going into a skyscraper or something.
If you have high-rise buildings, I mean, and it could be something through the doorman, but a lot of those places in the US, there aren't that many. Right now. New York City is pretty much a unique beast in almost any market, and a lot of those areas are already serviced pretty well, right? So New York City, you can get anything delivered almost for free anyway, because of the density. And so what we see as being a massive opportunity is the vast majority of the US that lives in suburbs or low-density urban environments where it's both much less of an issue because they tend to have houses or low-rise apartments that they can meet the vehicle, and it's way more expensive to offer a service like this to them. So there's a lot more sort of value add for doing something like this. But it's a great question. Long term, there will be other robots that can connect.
I'm sure you might be working on some of that as well. So we'll see in the future. So anyway, I still think it's a fascinating technology, and for those of you who didn't figure it out, I mean, this is a fully autonomous vehicle on real city roads. So that's something that I think is itself quite amazing.
So could I still ask the last question?
Oh, sure.
I know
Go
you're
ahead.
out of time.
Sure.
So I think first thing, you probably may not want to go muted colors. I think those bright colors look great. You know, it really stands out, and it's pretty nifty what you're doing. But does your roadmap also include in terms of leveraging this in how it could be used in the healthcare space, prescription, which is a $3.5 trillion market? Where are you at with that?
Yeah, so I did mention on one of our sort of slides here around what prescriptions I think is a really key one, and we've actually had inbound from a lot of major players for specific applications within healthcare, right? You can imagine sort of transplants and other things that need immediacy and very much on-demand delivery. We think that this is a pretty big one, right? And I think that if you look at prescriptions and the drug industry in general is not decreasing, and I think all of us are sort of taking more and more prescriptions and drugs, and we see this as a super useful way to do that. And because we have all of the technology to drive and be able to move safely, we also thereby have all of the technology to do whatever user validation you might need to do, right? We have cameras, we have LiDAR, we have radar, like any way that you want to like check that the person is actually who you think they are, like showing an ID, like photo and all of that is pretty trivial given that we already have a superset of the technology required to do that. Yeah.
Okay, so if there are no further questions, another big round for Dave.
Thank you guys.